Welcome to Season 5 of the Long-Winded One podcast. Listen as we showcase original work from top Royal Road authors read by professional voice actors. Hear interviews from your favourite lit RPG and game lit authors. Lastly, listen as the Long-Winded One tries his hand at his first ever lit RPG novel, The Four Treasures.
Well, welcome everybody to another and final episode of the Long-Winded One. And when I say final, I don't actually know whether I'm going to do another season or not. But this is episode 50 of the season that was all about lit RPG and game lit. We interviewed some people from Royal Road, some authors who, you know, most of them had never been published, didn't have audio book content out there. We paired them up with professional narrators, and they got to hear their story here on the podcast. So that was a great experience. Of course, being able to interview my favorite authors and narrators, the big names, the Robert Bevins and the Jonathan Sleeps and all those people that, Jeff Hayes and Jonathan McLean and all those guys from the season. That was so cool. I mean, these are the people that I've been reading for years. And of course, the third part of my goals for the season was to write my own novel, which, back in whenever it was, I think I wrote the first chapters in January of 2024. Seemed like, well, sure, yeah, whatever, you can write you can write a novel. But I have a guest with me here tonight, and he's an old friend. You'll recognize his voice from the Symbia dramatized season that we did here on the podcast. He's my friend Chris Tucci, and he's my narrator for this, or the narrator, I should say, not mine. He doesn't belong to me. But Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Jared. How are you?
Good. So I want to go back to that way back. I don't know when we talked. I think we actually talked after I had written the first couple of chapters and mapped everything out, probably back in March or April. And when I first pitched you this story and the idea about it, what were you thinking? I'm just curious.
I was thinking this is finally the culmination of the stuff we talked about on road trips like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, I was just so excited. I've always loved hearing about the worlds you're building and the stories you're creating. And so when you talked about this coming season and how you were going to go ahead and write a book and you were doing, I was like, oh, I have to do that. You have to let me do that. Like, I know your stories. I know your worlds. You've been my game master for D&D, and we've played together. Like, it was like the perfect moment. I was so excited when you told me about it.
Well, I was, I didn't want to assume that you would want to do it. You are a classically trained actor, and you've done a fair amount of voice work too, like critically acclaimed voice work, which I'll ask you to talk about here in a second. But I didn't want to assume that you were actually going to do it. So I know I kind of like tiptoed around it on that phone conversation. But if you could, what path did you sort of embark on to become a voice actor and eventually just do all of this voice acting work?
So, I went to undergrad for theater, which because we were there together. And then I went to graduate school at UCLA and got my MFA in acting for the TFT, the Theater, Film, and Television School, and had a blast out there and met a lot of great people, made some cool films, and then bounced around the country. I was a professor for a while, but all the time kind of doing acting. And at a certain point, I decided that I didn't want to do the version of sort of the professional artist where you spent your life, doing projects you weren't interested in and working with people you didn't really care about. And you know, I think a lot of artists get to that point at some point in their sort of career and their arc, and they decide which direction they want to go. And I sort of made a direct decision that I just wanted to work with the people I liked, and I wasn't going to chase, you know, chase things, dreams that weren't my dreams, and just focused on working with people who I thought were extraordinary people, because I think extraordinary people make work that's interesting and honest. And so, you know, all the films I do and the voiceover work I do is really, I don't audition anymore. I really just sort of meet my friends and talk to my friends. And you know, the last show I did was you know, a friend of mine who runs a theater and has always been wanting to get me on stage. And then my friend from college who's doing an audio book, and it all just sort of flows together.
So I'm just I'm thrilled to have you do the book, and we actually, we started releasing chapters earlier on in the season, as kind of like a taste of what's to come. Of course, the audio book, which will come out in November of 2024, is going to be a little. It's going to be professionally mastered, and the sound quality is going to be fantastic. But yeah, so if people are interested, obviously you're on episode 50. The way this has a tendency to work is if you check out a podcast, this episode is going to kind of sit on top for a while, especially if I don't put out another season for a while. And so if you're listening to this and you are interested in maybe getting a free, the whole first half of the book is going to be here on the podcast. So if you want to listen in and see if this is kind of your kind of story, it's going to be called, well, it is called Children of the Cold Moon. It is a lit RPG, game lit story. And in full disclosure, it's light. It's game light. I think I heard somebody kind of describe it, right? So there's numbers, and there, you're in kind of like what feels like a game like world. Um, it's the Celtic otherworld. There's magic, and there are, the characters level up and they get powers. But it's not as crunchy as some of the ones that are out there. And the world is set in, like I said, the Celtic, or in this case, the Irish otherworld, though we definitely borrow from Welsh and Scottish, and actually Manx mythology and history. So yeah, that's kind of where we are tonight. We have a few questions where we're going to ask each other. Chris has some that he's going to ask me, and I have a few more that I'm going to ask him. And then,
Yeah, I just want to say that, like, as a newcomer to lit RPG, when you told me about this, you know, I had never heard about it. I didn't know anything about this world. So your podcast was really the introduction to this, and it was you know, like when someone turns you on to a restaurant that you didn't know about, that was kind of in your backyard the whole time,
yeah,
and you just kind of drove by it, you didn't think of it, and they're like, you haven't gone there, and you go in and it has like the best, you know, the best ribs in the state, and it was in your backyard the whole time. I feel like that is like lit RPG for me. It's like, it's all the things I love. I grew up gaming, I grew up reading fantasy and science fiction, and it's such a natural combination that it, you know, I was worried honestly at the start, like, oh, is this going to feel artificial? Is it going to take me out of the story? I was like, no, it doesn't. It's just like when I'm playing a great video game, you know, when I'm, you know, working on my stat blocks, or I'm, you know,
yeah.
customizing my character. I'm not like thinking about like, oh, this is taking me out of the story. It's just, it is the story. It's such a cool thing. I'm so glad you introduced me to it.
What's funny is, in talking with, I think it might have actually been Jonathan McLean, famous for his, at least on my podcast, famous for doing the Big Sneaky Barbarian series and the Noobtown series. And he's actually, this month he's releasing another book. He's also a romance writer and was on Mad Men. He's done a ton of stuff, but one of the things that I think he mentioned was that, like, in terms of paperback sales, lit RPG doesn't even come close to people like Stephen King and like George R. R. Martin. But when you look at audiobooks, lit RPG is like owning Audible, and 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 so I think a lot of that has to do with the talent of the voice actors. Thank you, Chris. But it's also, it's representative of a whole like subpopulation of the world. You know, people that are getting into these, who have played video games their whole lives, or role playing games, or have done graphic novels or watched anime. You know, yeah. So I'm happy to have exposed you to it. It's all I read now. Every once in a while, a book will, a non-lit RPG book will creep into my, onto my nightstand, but very rarely. Well, Chris, I know you have some questions to ask me. I still have a few more to ask of you, but do you have anything that would sort of fit into this segue here?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to know, because you've had a chance to interview all these different authors, like if you were gonna like sort of crystallize, the thing that you're like, wow, I would have never known this had I not brought these people onto my podcast and talked to them. Like, if you could think of like one or two things that are like the gems that you picked up, you're like, wow, if I was going to do this all over again, it was worth it for these things I learned from these guys.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the lesson that I learned, the big one, probably even goes back before this season. And talking with all the authors from season 4, I think it was, yeah, season 4 was the Symbia series we did, and even before that, the historians. Um, and that's that. These are people, right? So they humanized this impossible thing for me. They still are my heroes, right? As human as they are, they're people who have followed a passion, and in talking through their processes, I realized that writing a novel is not insurmountable, and you know interviewing your heroes is not as hard as it might sound, right? You reach out and you ask. The worst they can say is no. so I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, I mean, it reminds me of like, sort of like the great Anne Lamott book, Bird by Bird. It's like, how do you do it? It's, you do it bird by bird,
yeah,
like, and then there it is, and then you're done.
yeah, it's not easy. I will tell you. There are some chapters that just come out, and hopefully, if it's like that old saying, right? If you're doing something you love, you'll never have to work a day in your life, right? Like if you're writing about something that you love and you're passionate about, the chapters will come, right? Especially if you've given it its proper research and thought. But there are some chapters that don't come, and there are some scenes that, and this may be another thing too, is right. Like the big thing for me was realizing that it's not every book is like the TV show 24, where it's like literally just 24 hours of action. um, and if you think of your novel that way, it's really daunting to think about. But that you know a novel is made up of little vignettes that are interesting, right? Pictures that you would love to paint and think about in your brain.
Oh
um,
yeah, yeah. My One of my favorite acting teachers of all time, Seth Barish, really talks about breaking down. When you break down a play, every play has a beginning, middle, and end. Every
mhm.
scene or every act has a beginning, middle, and end. Every scene has a beginning, middle, and end, and everything you do has a beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
And it, just breaking it down in that simple way, it was like, oh yeah, I can do that.
So speaking of breaking things down, I have a question for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I don't have any of your talents, so let me just start by saying that, right? Like I visual art is not my thing. I've always been a writer. I've always been a world creator. You could argue that they're bad worlds or bad writings, but whatever it is, I've always had something inside of me that has wanted to write and kind of knew how to write. Um, but I have no idea what it's like to do what you do. To be able to even just take the words off of a page and put them out into the world, whether you're memorizing them or reading them. So I am curious about what your process is like when you sit down at the booth and do a chapter.
Yeah. Well, there's the prep work, right? So, reading the chapter, are there any questions that you have about it? Are there any particular phrases you're worried about tripping over?
Plenty of them here in this story.
Yeah, pronunciation guide, that whole thing. There's like there's sort of the prep work I think that everyone does, and that's kind of like across the board. Um, but for me, it's really being open to what happens in the moment, and just being playful.
Hmm.
I think so much of what acting is about retaining that sort of playfulness and freedom that we all start out with.
Hmm.
We don't really censor ourselves when we're playing with our friends when we're younger, but as we get older and we start to, get told not to do this or not to be so loud or not to laugh so much or you're smiling too, you know what I mean? There's
It's another brick in the wall, as Pink Floyd said.
yeah, like wherever you're, trying to fit in some way. And I think acting is sort of saying I don't need to fit anywhere. Um, I just want to play.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of just being open to the playfulness of the story and allowing it to take you there and to be open to, sort of the emotional highs and lows and wherever it goes. I think that's a lot of it. I wish there was like a lot of people make a lot of money selling books and classes about how to do it. But, the greatest acting teachers I ever had were the ones who let me relax the most and just play. And sort of the directors who I love working with are the ones who build playgrounds and then just sort of let you loose in the playground.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's all it is for me. I just love the chance to be silly and to tell stories and to have fun.
Well, I've told you this before, but never publicly, and I think it's important to say this. You have gotten this story from day one. I remember when you sent me some sample chapters, and as talented as you are, you sound like my friend, the friend that I've known for 30 years almost, right, or however many years it's been. And so like I couldn't objectively listen to the sample chapters without sharing them with loved ones and being like, what do you think? And it was everybody across the board, and myself included. You just got like, you got the tone, you got the characters, um and and so I have a couple more questions actually about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I'll start with your, I guess maybe the biggest challenge, right, of the story. Is it the 85 words in the pronunciation guide, or what do you think? What do you think the biggest challenge is for Children of the Cold Moon?
The biggest challenge of Children of the Cold Moon. Wow. I mean, the pronunciation guide is a thing, right? But I wouldn't call that, I mean, it's not difficult. Like once the word sits in your mouth and you know why you're saying it, it's really easy to they just sort of become natural. I think the most challenging part of this is that I really want my friend to be happy.
Oh, well,
I do a lot of work, and I always want to do a good job, but I know how deeply you care about and how carefully you've crafted the story. So I want what I produce and send to you to match sort of the care and level of like deep world building and like deep character. I just want to bring, I would just want to match the effort, I guess is is the most challenging part. Every single time I send a chapter to you, I'm nervous for like until you respond and I'm like, "Oh god, I hope we liked this one."
oh man, yeah. I mean, so I want to tell you two moments that stand out, that I thought like it just like you like got me. There was the scene where Theoden and Bren are and Morius is sleeping. They're sitting around the campfire, and they're having their first heart to heart. And Bren's like, "Why are you so mean to me? Like, I don't understand." And they end up having this really nice conversation. When I wrote that chapter, I'm a creature of habit. All of my chapters are 6 pages long. Some are the very end of page 5, some are the very beginning of page 7, but for the most part all of my chapters are 6 pages long. I am That is how my brain works. That's how I write. But that chapter, I think, was 4.5 pages long. It was the shortest chapter in the whole book. and it bothered me for a really long time. Maybe it's because I'm like, I got some OCD in me or something. I'm not sure. But I didn't really appreciate that chapter until you sent me your audio file, and it's the last line when Theoden thanks Bren. It was just the tone of your voice where I felt like, all right, I get it now. I get how Theoden was feeling, even though I wrote it. I get how Theoden was feeling just based on
Isn't she the
that.
best? I
Yeah.
love Theoden.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Every time she's in a chapter, it's like so exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, she's a blast. She is so much fun.
Well, so the other one that really stood out to me was you were when Bren first meets Fern, or Fernowin as
Mhm.
is her full name, and he's describing her freckles, and you have this moment where, and she had freckles, and like you like really got into it, and I was like, oh man, yes, this is a first person narrator talking about freckles. Yeah, yeah, very good. Cool. Well, so tell me, so I got the biggest challenge now, but tell me like what. So we're going to be delivering this whole first half, as I mentioned here on the podcast.
Uh-huh.
What has like what's been your favorite part about this whole first half? Is there like a chapter or like a, I don't know, if you could, maybe you don't break it, maybe in your mind you don't break it down by chapter.
You know what it well, so I think I love the characters are all so distinct and they're all so clearly, they've got their sort of mythological roots, but they seem so contemporary and real, and I just love, you know, getting a new chapter, going through it, and when a new character arrives and getting to sort of, sit down with the visuals and just sitting in the booth for an hour and playing with sounds until I find their voice. It's so
Yeah.
much fun. It's
Do
just a
you
blast.
do you use the website with all the pictures on it
Oh yeah.
to yeah.
Yeah, I have that, and I have my, little screen set up in my booth, and I'll just, let the audio roll with those pictures, and I'll have other videos loaded of, if there's a reference of a particular, actor or character from a television or movie, or something that might inspire it. Just, getting to sit there and just make weird noises in a booth by myself is so much fun. And I love, I gotta say, like, I said, I love Fiat and I love Morius. Like these these characters are, they feel so real and so close, um, that, like all good books, when we have to say goodbye to them, like when the story's over, it's like, I don't know, I do, I feel like I feel like I really know those guys, especially Morius, um, and Theoden, and I have lots of feelings about Rue and the Olafesht. Like they're just, yeah, it's just a blast. It's what I love. Like, I mean, like, how did you, when you built like this world based on Celtic mythology, but you weave together like this, connection to pop culture, like all of like, there's just such treats for all the sort of the various aspects of nerd and geek dork culture. Like, how did you weave that together and play with all that? And and like, how do you know so much about Celtic mythology? What the heck?
Well, so I think the short answer of that is like because I'm a geek, right? Like I'm just writing what I know. But I think like I've always, I was always kind of fascinated with Celtic mythology. I've been to, the very opening scene when they're in Caerwent in Wales. I've been there. I've been there to watch the sunrise behind those standing stones, right? So I started with something that I knew,
Oh,
and I've been there twice, in fact, and I I love it. I know it, and I actually picked something that was really difficult because I knew Dark Age Welsh history. That's what I studied.
oh,
Not like in college, but just for like fun. And Irish history, I kind of stayed away from in mythology because there was no clear or defined pantheon. I mean, there kind of is, but
Yeah.
there was no writing down their myths until the Christians came and, basically mucked up the. I'm not anti-Christian, obviously, but in terms of their, the prehistory and the mythology, like Christians put their own spin on it, right? So suddenly there was new saints and stuff, and people were inserted into the mythology or changed or started representing different aspects. And when things did get written down, there was like 25 different versions of a myth, right? In this story, this guy begets this person, and the next story, it's reversed. And so the really tricky part, and I've always said this, is if you're writing a story, or at least for me, if I'm planning a campaign or writing a story, it starts with a map. It starts with a map, and if there's like a god component, you need that family tree, you need the pantheon. And so basically, what I tried to do without crapping all over Irish mythology is to just pick a lineage that is the most true that I could find that also fits in my story. And so that's what I did. I made a map, and I made a pantheon, or I didn't make the pantheon. I assembled the pantheon from all of
Yeah.
the fragments that I could find. And then, the other piece of this that really has come together. I've tried to write things before, like full length novels, and I didn't have the longevity, I guess, to do it.
Yeah, you
Because
got it. I mean, it's a workout.
it's a workout, but you also you have to spend time doing things that are not just writing, right? So if you love writing and you're going to write about, mythology without basically just making it all up, you got to do that research. Um, and, and you got to like talk to people, and you got to, and then when it comes to the whole, like, publishing I'm publishing on Royal Road, there's like a whole marketing aspect of that. And it just takes you away from the writing. So the thing that really helps me now, I've never, and I want to preface this by saying I use AI, but I never used AI to write anything. What I use AI for, artificial intelligence, is to help me research, to help me with pronunciations. Um, I even use it. I use Midjourney to sort of help me with images, so that my time is spent writing, right, about what I see and about what I've, because I can ask AI a very pointed question without cracking a book, without, scouring the internet for things. And so AI has really sped up the other parts, right? And so that I can just write. And that's made a huge difference for me. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, it does. I think, every artist has to find what tools work for them in order for them to create. And like there are certainly like all sorts of like ethical complications around the use of AI, but there are also ways to use it that allow you to make art. And it sounds like you've used it in a way that allows you to create, which is really cool.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so like the images are great because, you're still like, you have to put in a prompt, right? Like what you're looking for. And I've gone through hundreds and hundreds of photos. And when you finally find one that you like, that's used as like, a model, right? So when I describe the Stern Beauty, for example, like I had an image of the Stern Beauty that I, pulled out of AI, based on prompts, based on ship research, how many masts, right? Like how low to the water, how many decks, right? Like
Yeah,
all of this stuff is stuff how would I know that? Right. So, but that's research, and that goes into the prompt generation and image generation. And then, something that would have taken me 4 days to research has taken me 40 minutes. Right. And then I can write about the Stern Beauty then. Right.
sure, sure. No, I know what you mean. I am really fortunate because I have some extraordinary former students from when I was a professor who went into library science,
Mm-hmm.
and I send them questions, and because they're all expert researchers, that's been the way I've done it.
That's your AI.
It's I mean, but they're just brilliant, and I've got former students who are PhDs and so extraordinary geniuses. Well, way, way, way better at research than I ever was. And so they're super helpful when we're doing that, when I'm writing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, it's whatever tool works for you as a writer. And for me, I try to be true to things, right? I mean, the story's like some parts are ridiculous, and there's a lot of like pop culture references, and it's because I think that kind of stuff is funny, right? And it's
Yeah.
because and though it may date my story in 40 years, right? Like people that are reading the story here in the next 5 years are going to get this, and it's really gonna like people like me it's going to resonate with them, right?
Look, I'm not saying you're Shakespeare, but it's filled with contemporary references. Like
Yeah.
anybody who wants to write something that's evergreen, like go for it.
Yeah.
Right? Like you set it in just a pure high fantasy world, and there's no references to anything. But even then, everything is a product of its time. Like
Yeah.
all of the allegories are really allegories to whatever's happening or was important at that time. It's like,
Yeah. Well, you have any more questions for me, buddy? Because I bet people are wanting to get to these episodes.
of course, they want to get to these episodes. I guess my question would be for this, uh, for folks who want to do the stuff that you're doing. Can you give like a tip? Because the thing I've always known about you is that even if you don't write the book, you build an amazing world that's incredibly detailed and filled with rich history and maps. And like for somebody who is like gonna start their first book, like what's the first step for them? Like if you're gonna be like, okay, this always helps me when I'm
Mhm.
about to take the first step on this long journey.
Yeah. I mean, so I think it depends on the person. I can tell you what it is for me, right? So
Yeah.
a little bit of pressure never hurts, right? So in January, we were on a car trip actually to go see, to drive back to Ohio to go see my folks, and that's when I was driving, and right, and I'm like, I got an idea, and of course I'm like, hey, I told my wife like, hey, can you get out my laptop and like, I want to do a season 5 on Lit RPG. And she's like, okay. So I said, open I told her how to log into my website and how to basically like put it on there. This is what we're doing. And so like from like January 1st, 2024, I put it out there publicly that I was going to write a novel.
Yeah.
And so having a little bit of pressure to like get me through like this isn't as easy as I thought it was going to be, like days, that helps, right? Knowing that there are people out there, like thousands of people who write, and being a part of that Royal Road community, where you can go, and there are people out there that don't care in the slightest about like making money and publishing. They just like writing and sharing their world, and like being interviewing these people and learning from them. I got lots of great advice from these people, and also the big names, right? Like I mentioned before, like it's not, these are just people. They're like, it, it really made it something that like is attainable.
Mhm.
The other piece of this is I also think like if you and this was me for 20 years, like if you I sat at countless hours at Starbucks and tried to write the next great American author novel, and
Yeah.
like if you put that kind of pressure on yourself, like you're like, okay, I'm going to be the next Hemingway, or like, whomever, like what I'm going to produce now is going to be talked about for years, and they're going to be quoting me. And like, if you put that kind of pressure on yourself, you will write a chapter and then you will throw it away. And that's what I did for years. And
Mm.
by getting into Lit RPG, by not taking, I mean, it's serious literature. I don't want to take away from it. I love it. It's a part of me. It's a part of thousands of people's lives. It gets people through the days. These authors and these narrators lift people up on the way to and from work. If they're waiting in the hospital for a loved one, they're listening to their audiobooks. um, these people, they're serious, so I don't want to take anything away from it, but at the same time, it doesn't take itself too seriously, right? Like it's not trying to be Tolkien, right? It's trying to tell a story and be entertaining. And I think if you can write a story that you love, and your only pressure is to like entertain yourself, then, or you're to entertain your narrator,
Mhm.
then you can write it, you can do it, you know?
Yeah, totally. I love it.
All right, buddy. Well, thanks again for all the work that you put in. And hoping people read this and listen to it and enjoy it.
Yeah, and
And
thanks for making stuff for all of us nerds out there. This is awesome, man.
you got it, buddy. All right. Later.
Peace.
Chapter 2, A Voice on the Wind. December 21st, 2014, 8:19 a.m. Carwent, UK. Eru. The hill turned bright. My eyes burned with the light of the sun. In that moment, I lost all sense of time. I heard a deep voice, broken up as if it were calling from far away, before eventually becoming more clear. It was unmistakably masculine, and somehow also soft and nurturing. It was impossible to not feel completely overwhelmed and connected to it.
I can see you, Bren, as can all that search for you.
I didn't know what to say. The words flowed into me and through me. I knew in my bones the words represented truth, even though I couldn't process their meaning.
Boons and domains cannot be granted while you reside in Eru.
Each word slammed into my mind, nearly knocking me over. The light started to dim, and I forced my eyes closed against the overwhelming sensations. Eventually, I heard a different, familiar male voice saying my name.
Bren, are you okay?
Tathan was by my side, shaking me while he held me up. My knees felt weak and unsteady. I continued to hold on to the druid stone to better balance myself. I don't know. What just happened? My eyes began to refocus on the hill. It looked different. The dawn light was upon us, yet there were still shadows among the trees and stones of the hill. Between the shadows leaped familiar colors. They appeared as wisps of air and light, flitting from object to object. These colors were the remnants of the voice and light that had nearly consumed me moments before. "Can you see that?" I asked Tathan, feeling a bit alarmed. He smiled at me and scanned the hillside where I was watching the color bound away.
Aye, those are the colors of the other world. But don't worry, only you and I can see them.
That's actually why I'm concerned.
What I mean is, anyone who has been to Anun, the other world, can see the wisps of the weave.
Still concerned. Nothing he was saying seemed to make any sense to me. My heart beat faster, and I could feel a cold sweat begin to dot my forehead. I pulled away from Tathan and began backing up the hill. Tathan put his hands up reassuringly.
I brought you up here this morning to help you remember your past.
I continued backing away from him as he talked. Around him, the structures and vegetation on the hill began to change. As the colors passed over certain objects, they appeared to grow and move. Tathan himself looked different. His clothes were changing. They flashed between his modern hiking gear and a more rustic woolen robe. I rubbed my eyes. I think someone drugged me last night.
No one drugged you.
Tathan took a cautious step toward me.
The veil between this world and the other is thin for the moment. You are seeing all of this through a lens that has no temporal rules. The weave sometimes interacts with the mortal world in very strange ways. Tell me what you see.
This man had been my caretaker for 4 years. He was the closest thing to a father I had in the world. But at that moment, he looked completely foreign to me. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I ran. Up the hill I went, sprinting past the other druid stones. The path continued going up and up toward the crest of the hill. I didn't know if Tathan was following. I couldn't hear anything except the pounding of my heart and the growing sound of a whistling wind. Before long, I found myself gasping in huge lungfuls of air. My sprint had turned into a slow, exhausted shamble. As I slowed, I began hearing voices on the wind. "Who's there?" I asked, turning and looking in all directions. In my haste, I stumbled backward into a low depression. Rocks dug into my back, and I could feel the frozen dew from the grass melting onto any exposed skin that touched the ground. I was lying at the bottom of what could only be described as a pit made from rough-hewn boulders. I struggled to my feet and looked at the long grass growing between the rocks. This must be the Iron Age hill fort that Tathan had mentioned. It was clearly a man-made depression. As that thought passed through my mind, the colorful light found me again and began changing the stones around me. I saw them grow and lock in place with the other stones. I saw the grass recede back down through the cracks in the rocks. I saw the rocks extend up into a roof. I bolted back up the rocks before I could be closed in, and I began running again up the hill. "Hey, Shorty!" The high-pitched female voice had a strange accent. I stopped. I knew that voice from somewhere. "I hear you," I said to the air. The voice said something back to me, but the words were carried away in the wind. I looked around and saw that I had reached the top of the hill. It was flat and had been deforested over time. A fierce, frozen wind blew from the west, and as nothing was hindering its path, it blew the warmth from my body. "Bren!" I turned to see Tathan behind me. He was doubled over from his heavy breathing. Clearly he had been trying to keep up with my dash up the hill. I took a step backward. "Tathan, I'm really freaking out here. You really aren't my manservant, are you?" I paused for a moment to catch my own breath and to let the gravity of all that had transpired sink in. "What the hell is going on?"
Would this be the wrong time to tell you that my name is not really Tathan?
Tathan chuckled uneasily at my shocked expression. "No kidding," I said, trying to hold back my utter sense of disorientation. "Of all the things that have gone on this morning, that is the least of my concerns."
My real name is Morius, but I have gone by many names over the years. Tathan is actually a name I used when those Roman walls back in town were just newly built. Back then they called me Tathu. But the Roman influence stuck, he shrugged. So, Tathan it became.
Thank you for that enlightening history lesson. But do you really expect me to believe you're 2,000 years old? He smiled.
Oh, I'm much older than that.
What is happening right now? Are we both losing our minds?
No, we are not losing our minds. But I am only able to explain some of what you need to know.
Fine. And though my world had suddenly been turned upside down, something about that moment felt inherently correct. I looked at the man before me as if for the first time, and it felt real. His gaze told me that he too felt as if a barrier had been removed. He sighed.
First, your parents weren't killed.
Are my parents spies or something? I couldn't help but interrupt. We had been building this dynamic for 4 years.
This is one of those moments,
he began. Where I need to work on listening, I said, trying to finish his thought.
Aye, he paused. I can only tell you so much. If your parents are still alive, they live in a place called Anun, with your people.
What do you mean, my people?
Annwn is a realm of magic, of gods, and of the She. Your people are the She.
Wait, what? The look on his face told me he wasn't sure how best to proceed.
Walk with me to the western edge of the hill. It's only about a 5-minute walk.
We set off across the top of Wolves Hill. There were parts where the only thing I could hear was the rushing of the wind. But there were also low spots where I was certain I could also hear a high-pitched voice calling my name. We reached a great drop-off facing due west. In the distance, I could see the large town of Newport, where we had taken the train from London the day before. On the edge of the hill was another rough-hewn stone about the size of a water cooler. Morius moved around in front of me and gestured at the stone.
This is Leofoil, the Stone of Destiny. It has been in my care since the dawn of your time. There is another stone with the same name in Ireland. That one is fake, as many have guessed over the years.
I rolled my eyes. The Stone of Destiny? Seriously, dude?
Bren, please don't denigrate one of the most prized relics in either world.
Right. How silly of me. Please, continue.
The Irish say that if the rightful King of Ireland puts his feet upon this stone, the stone will roar in joy.
Are you trying to say that I'm the rightful King of Ireland? That would be so cool, I thought.
No.
Then you're losing me.
I was entrusted with the task of preparing you for this day. Today, the Stone of Destiny will return to Annwn, and you will be the one to take it.
I looked down at the stone. The thing probably weighed as much as a small car. You serious, Clark? I laughed. He had to be joking. I am the world's strongest man! I banged my chest and proudly set my foot on the stone. Suddenly there was a great crashing sound. It began like the sound of a car crash, then transformed into the roaring of 1,000 lions, all in different octaves. I immediately jumped back, pulling my foot off the stone. Morius smiled at me.
There is one other thing you should know about the stone.
He trailed off. His attention moved back to the general area of the stone in question, and my eyes followed his. A voice spoke from ground level, in that same high-pitched voice I had heard on the wind. "It shrinks!" announced the small winged woman standing where the large stone had been just a moment before. "Thanks for making it easy to find you, Shorty." She reached down and picked up a rock about the size of my palm and tossed it to me. It bounced gracefully off my chest and fell back to the ground as my mouth hung open.
Bren,
Morius said,
allow me to introduce you to Fiadan et Lathan.
Thank you for joining us down this Lit RPG deep dive. Please consider giving us a review on Apple Podcasts and visit us over at longwinded.one, where you can see past episodes and find all of our socials, even our new Discord server. We hope you enjoy.